Hello, everybody. I heard a lot of words so far, and I liked a few very much. Get it done, yes. So I'm presenting something, I think, how we maybe could get something done. Work together, great. Yes, let's try that. And let's see how we can do that. I'm talking about 3D Experience City, and let's look at this in a moment. How do we want to talk about it? It's in the real and in the virtual. Why that? So of course, everybody knows the real city, that's where we're every day in, but how can we talk about the virtual city? The city that may not yet exist, or the city that we want to digitize in order to comprehend it better, the city we collect data of, and we can visualize data, we can analyze data, etc. So I strongly suggest to think of the city always in a complete holistic manner, real and virtual at the same time, in order to create a new digital future for Michigan, in order to create opportunities for all of us, and in order to join us onto a platform that enables us all to be inventive, creative, and to create the future together. So how does it fit very well to this entirety of the 2 next days is because I believe strongly that all 3 topics are interlinked and find their location within the city or within the state. And even though I'm associated mostly to the connected technology bubble, let's say, I strongly believe this is only a facilitator that enables us to come together, create and think together, and also to create jointly new economic opportunities. So let's zoom out a little bit just to understand why the urban topic is such a relevant topic and why everybody jumps on the topic of smart cities, but I would like to talk about experience city. Why is that? Smart cities typically are linked to sensor technology, a lot of data collection. I would like to discuss it more in terms of experience. What do we all experience within the city, and how do we change that very experience, and how can we all collaborate to create experience? Now, zooming out, the topic is so relevant because, of course, you know, we have a strong increase in world population, and many cities suffer from too many new incoming urban dwellers. Now, Detroit has another problem, perhaps. It is shrinking. However, both types of city have the same challenge. They need to think about how do we cope with either the shrinking or the adding of a lot of population, and are our tools that we currently have available in terms of urban planning tools appropriate? So the second problem we're looking at is that cities as we have currently built them, and you know, this is a tradition, of course, that is thousands of years old, but in particular the cities we're living in today are very created in response to mobility, to the car. So the question then is, how can we rethink the city in the moment we start to rethink mobility, in the moment we start to think differently about networks, of how actually one network associates with the next one. And why is this necessary is because as more and more population arrives on the earth, more and more the resources get scarce. And if we look at this, only 3% of the global land area is covered with cities. However, 50% of the global waste is created there, 70% of the greenhouse gas is emitted here, and 75% of all natural resources are consumed or at least temporarily bound. So this creates overall a stress we have felt here in Michigan, in Detroit in particular, because we feel resource scarcity. There's a lot of waste, we have failing infrastructures, pollution, aging population loss, poverty, criminality, and so forth and so forth. And that's not unique to this area. This is very typical throughout the world, regardless whether you have a shrinking city or a growing city. So the question then is, how can we understand the networks of networks better? What are we doing in terms of understanding particularly cascading networks effects? So I quickly describe what I mean by that. By looking at New York City, it felt black. It was suddenly dark. Why? Because Sandy came about, and Sandy, of course, pushed a lot of water into the city. Flooding occurred, that was kind of predicted. Electricity went out, not fully predicted. But what was in particular not predicted is that hundreds and thousands of elderly were kept in the verticals, could not move back out onto the ground, had health concerns, had nutrition concerns, and so forth. So what we see here is that only to understand completely the effect of such a blackout, we need to understand the complexities of the system of systems. So in order to do this, we should create something which I call urban resilience. And what is this? Urban resilience comes through an approach that is a holistic approach to the network of networks. It is also investing into new technologies for the future, in particular when we're thinking of new infrastructures. And again, thinking the infrastructure from the moment of design to following it through to the build, to then doing predictive maintenance on it, but also fostering cross-domain concepts, and most importantly, creating a social and economic resilience. So what is in the way of this type of development? Of course, limited funds and very strongly fragmented silos. We all work in departments. We all work either in the city or we work in private businesses. And regardless where we work organized mostly in silos and keep our data siloed. We also have, even though we're all very connected, still a limited citizen participation. We have not created a platform yet that enables citizens to come together and work in a crowd, and we don't source the crowd in this way. And finally, through being more and more connected, we see increasingly a privacy and security concern arising that will be even more arising as we look into the Internet of Things. So therefore, I suggest to think city differently. We want to think about the city in terms of an experience. We want to think of it as a holistic approach. We want to found it on a platform that is not just enabling us to do data analytics and visualization. No, it is also enabling us to envision the city, plan the city, analyze the city planning, simulate the city planning prior to actually building the city. So if you look at Detroit, for example, we have many stakeholders that are currently actively building in the city. What if they would all come together on a joint platform and enable a comprehensive planning? And what if we could even simulate that very comprehensive planning so that one would see what possible effects it would have? So looking at this, you could say this is perfect because it could be an export good that is made in Detroit and could be then venturing out into the world. And guess, there's a great audience for it because look how many cities there are. And none of them has anything like this yet, except one is currently building this up, that is Singapore City. Now, if you look at this, there's a tremendous challenge overall if you see how many cities exist that are beyond 1 million inhabitants. Many of them we have never heard the name of. Also, businesses are incredibly attracted to questions of contextualization of the city. So, for example, automotive firms currently looking into the city. Why is that? Because they're looking into the city for service asset and to understand the car and the autonomous car, of course, within a context. Now, if you look on the bottom, who's our audience? It's not just the human, it's also the thing. And why is that? Because the thing's listening and sending information and start to communicate among themselves. Now, this is a little scary perhaps to you, and it's not an anti-humanism that I propose here, but it's the reality of how we have to assess the situation. And if you look into how many billion entities of things will exist that actually receive service, you can imagine what kind of economy is behind this potentially. So if we engage in this actively, saying we are serving also things, there's a huge potential here based on one and the same backbone. So this suggests a typical actor network of the future and of the present already is a human, a thing, and a content interaction. So this can lead to, first, a very connected population that is all about servicing to one and another, crowd-based, but also it requires a platform ecosystem. And for the city in particular, the question then is how do we address different topics? How do we ensure that one and the same platform can serve facility management, utility, health, social services, economy, environmental planning, education, and so forth? And some of those topics we will discuss today in our panel. So particular health will be discussed by Wright Lasseter from Henry Ford Health System, and he will discuss in how far health and big data and connectivity go together. Now, what are the platform opportunities? So if we imagine right now all joining on the same city platform, what are the opportunities here? On one hand, we have one single data referential created that we all could look at, understand, and of course with different access rights, make sense of and use. We have a collaborative environment everybody could join and work together. And we have an environment where we do city design. We create the city actively. We also can manage the city and service the city. And this, again, of course, creates a marketplace. So we have a marketplace created. So this opens up a total new business arena that we haven't even started to look into. How do we do that? Based on a platform and leveraging different enabling environments, different topics and solutions could be created. They could be created by startups. We could encourage a whole different creative scene joining the effort. It could be done by large businesses as they exist within Detroit and Michigan region. It could be done by the automotive industry that is here, has a great legacy. It could be done by many other players worldwide, could be joining here the effort. So now I show you a little bit, is a video of actually you were zooming into an active dynamic data model of a city in France. And why do I show this to you is this is completely based on a dynamic data model. And you see how the, here in this case, there's a stadium. And the question is that stadium, how do we manage to understand here the approach to the stadium? So the stadium is not yet existing, it's in planning. And you see the different infrastructures that from subway to tramway to highways and roads that would enable an approach. Here we can see different urban analyses. We're looking at the minutes it would take to get to this particular stadium. And again, this could be any other type of inquiry, any type of different analysis. And you see significant regions of the city were not approachable. So what type of interventions could be planned? In this case, let's plan a bridge, a new tram line, in order to improve the reachability. And you understand, I think you get the point. And again, here, it is also a communication tool. It is enabling not only a precision of planning, but is also enabling the communication about the planning to a broader audience, to come together, to agree on the planning. So now look into how do we achieve this. We achieve this by looking at urban intelligence, that is data analytics and visualization, urban creation, urban simulation, and urban management. So if we look at the data analytics in particular, we're looking at a data federation, bringing all the data together. We look at data mining. We look at sentiment analysis, which is listening into the social media, understanding what people say, and looking at optimization. Now, how does that look like for the city? And I show you here the federation of how the model that I just showed you in the video before is actually built up. And it is not complicated, does not take too much. So just a few sets of data are enabling us to auto-generate a basic understanding of the city environment in 3D. Now, this could be, of course, refined and is completely contingent upon the data that is available. So but what you see here is how the city context is created through, on the left side, the data sets, auto-generated, and gives you a three-dimensional understanding of the city, which is very easy to understand by a lay person, and of course could also be used for planning purposes, which I show you in a moment. So you can associate to this any type of analysis, understanding what is the population ratio here, who is working, who's not working, where are the schools, what is the economic impetus of this intervention versus the other, and so forth. So here, Keith Collins will be on our panel discussing this, coming from SAS, and he in particular will show us how big data is of relevance and how we can actually capture within big data new comprehensions through analysis and visualization. So now looking at the advanced design enabling environment, which is in particular important to architects, urban designers, developers per se, looking at how do we plan the urban, how do we plan the civil engineering, how do we plan the building design and the infrastructure in a coherent whole. Now, usually private investors come in and plan their respective infrastructure, but here we're looking really into how we bring this together into a comprehensive overall planning strategy. So, and you see here typical ways of doing urban zoning laws, programming, and here I would like to show you how, for example, the planning of a bridge could be considered in a larger context. So it's an engineering work, of course, but it will affect everybody. And in order to simulate the effects of this bridge, it is not only important to model it and understand what parts go into it in order to assess the cost, but you could also link project management to it. I think you understand what range and scope of possibilities we have. This, of course, can be transferred to buildings, to any detail of the buildings and the pipes within the buildings, and also can be associated definitely for the infrastructural planning and to the link to the sensor data that comes from it. Which brings me to the simulation. Now, what if we do and plan something, however, don't know what impact it has? It needs to be analyzed and it needs to be simulated in order to understand, is this a good or a bad solution we're proposing here? So in order to do this, different ways of simulations are possible, and I just have a selection here for you, from structure analysis, climate analysis, to water management. And in Singapore, for example, the city we're working with, what's critical here is it's very hot, steamy climate. And what we have here as a problem is you want to create passive cooling. In order to do this, you need to associate, understand the wind direction, the dynamics that are created through the organization of the urban interventions. And if we look into other opportunities here, in this case it's a stadium, we look at how would fire propagate within the stadium. You can, of course, create rescue planning, and any other thing can be simulated of this sort. So I've clicked you very quickly through this in order to give you just a scope of understanding what's possible, what can be simulated in order to create a comprehensive planning strategy for the infrastructure, for buildings, for anything in the city. You may say, that's not very relevant to me as a citizen, perhaps. I think it will be relevant to you because it will affect instantaneously, let's say, the rescue planning for you. It will affect instantaneously in terms of blackout, how response systems will be activated and so forth. In this case, it's a simulation of a flooding in a river channel where you can predict what part of the city would be flooded given a certain amount of rain falling. So now going to the IoT and IoE enabling environment, what we see here, and this brings us back to Detroit directly, is a direct connection between the car, but also any other Internet of Thing or Internet of Experience item that we find. So what is so particular about it is, the car so far is already pretty smart. However, it will be in the future even more smarter in the way that it has to communicate with all the other cars. But not only that, it needs to communicate and understand in a comprehensive fashion the entire environment it's driving in order to be safe. Now, the testing of this is tremendously expensive because any type of change that happens to the sensorial system of the car would have to be tested. Currently, it's mostly done in the reality. It's test-driven. What we're looking at right now is a virtual and real environment of how the car is tested in a virtual twin of the city. So it will take away a lot of effort and money that is currently spent on it. Again, it is not about the car as we heard already. It is about the experiences. It is about how we as humans experience the different mobility offers, how the city becomes accessible through the different offers we have here. And this, of course, asks for us, what do we need in terms of a modeling? What do we need in terms of a virtual real correlation? How much technology, how much connectivity is relevant, and what are the surplus values it creates for all of us? Not just for the car, in the car industry and optimizing their technology, for us safety-wise in terms of driving to our everyday activities, but also understanding everything we have as an offer in a different way, accessible, available. A new economy, service economy, is going to arrive through this. So, and here, particular to this topic, we will have John Quant from Ford Smart Mobility talking about this on our panel. And I would like to have one more discussion, and I'm running out of time, so I will be very fast, on urban infrastructure. Because I feel urban infrastructure is of key importance, not only because urban infrastructure is tremendously aging in the US. A lot of the infrastructure is 80 plus years old. We have a tremendous loss of assets, of natural resources through the infrastructure, but also because it's a great opportunity. It's a way of how we could rebuild actively, collaboratively, our cities. So in particular, looking again at the same setup, I'm not repeating this, you can launch on this on a joint platform collaboratively, one data referential, all of the interventions within the city. And why is this critical? Is on one hand, we want to get away from paper documents, come to a data-driven approach, and that is applicable not just for infrastructure, it goes across the entirety of the offer. And getting from silo services to smart advanced services. And that's a principle I'm talking about here. That is a principle of the Internet of Things that will enable all of us to be more profitable in the future. And finally, I will show you quickly how this looks like. In terms of a virtual twin, you have the design that is a virtual version of the infrastructure that is built, and then you can monitor it in the actual run and do predictive maintenance on the infrastructure. So we do this for freshwater intake with all of the details it would encounter, looking at all of the different standards applied. And here, this is a model again from Singapore where you see how this is applied, even understanding the ground. So Singaporeans these days think of the ground as an asset as much as they think above the ground as an asset. And you can see here, it's the entirety of infrastructure, not only one network, but all networks, and all of their correlation to one another that is presented. So I'm finishing up with looking at one more topic here, which is here again, virtual and the virtual and the real intersecting, enabling us for better work and lifestyle, enabling us for a more sustainable way of living, ensuring that we're not spending unnecessary money for infrastructure interventions or surprises that we find once we're opening the ground. So I finished with Singapore, which is currently underway. It's called Virtual Singapore. The ambition is to create a complete virtual twin of the city of Singapore, the state of Singapore, with the ambition not just for the sake of having a virtual version of Singapore, but to bring together, correlate all of the efforts, and more importantly, come together jointly, interconnected, in order to make Singapore a better place, a more profitable place, but more importantly, also a better place to live and work in. Thank you.